The resolution on Sri Lanka at the UN Human Rights Council, sponsored by 5 nations, including the US, was adopted this evening. 23 member nations to the UNHRC voted for the resolution, while 12 voted against. 12 member nations abstained.
The human rights situation in Sri Lanka continues to deteriorate despite some areas of limited progress. The resolution highlights this Council's growing concern over persistent sexual and gender-based violence, enforced disappearances, extrajudicial killings, torture, violations of the rights to freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly, threats to judicial independence and the rule of law, as well as intimidation of and reprisals against human rights defenders, members of civil society, lawyers, and journalists. This resolution requests that the Office of the High Commissioner undertake, with assistance from relevant experts and special procedures, a comprehensive investigation into alleged serious violations and abuses of human rights and related crimes by both parties in Sri Lanka during the period covered by the report of the government's own Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission. This Council has urged the government of Sri Lanka to accept technical assistance from the OHCHR and relevant special procedures in order to address these concerns. But unfortunately, the government has not chosen to accept that assistance. The resolution continues to encourage that cooperation, and it also reiterates this Council's call on the government of Sri Lanka to implement the constructive recommendations in Sri Lanka's own LLRC report and to hold accountable those responsible for violations.
Anyone unaware of the ground situation in Sri Lanka walking into this room today could not be blamed for thinking that Sri Lanka is the most troubled place in this planet. But those aware who are here are also well aware that there is no urgent situation in Sri Lanka which warrants the interest which has now been shown. I've listened to about 15 to 20 minutes of concerns about Sri Lanka and how people want to help Sri Lanka. The question is, what is the best way to do so? The draft resolution before this Council is, if adopted, will not only constitute a serious breach of international law, but create a dangerous precedent in the conduct of international relations within the established global order of sovereign states, and could pose a grave threat to the sovereignty and independence of member states of the United Nations, which is enshrined in the Charter. By a deliberate failure to specify a time period in Operative Para 10b, the draft resolution may confine its ambit between 2002 and 2009 by adopting a narrower interpretation of the period covered by the LLRC, thus completely excluding the atrocities and violations of international human rights and international humanitarian law committed by the LTTE prior to 2002. Is this the intention of the sponsors of this resolution? It is in this context that we are disappointed to observe that a key imperative driving this resolution is not genuine concern for the welfare of the Sri Lankan people, but electoral compulsions of some states at the behest of certain extreme elements with links to the LTTE. Such biases and extreme ideologies ignore the ground realities, the legitimate aspirations of the Sri Lankan people, and trivialize the price paid by all Sri Lankans to defeat a 30-year brutal terrorist conflict and consolidate peace. Before this Council takes a decision on the draft resolution, I wish to appeal to the conscience of the member states. Sri Lanka has embarked on a painstaking process of reconciliation. Don't put spokes in the wheel. Irrespective of the outcome of today's decision, I wish to categorically state that the democratically elected government of Sri Lanka, and indeed all peace-loving people in my country, will never countenance any return of armed conflict or terrorism. Therefore, Sri Lanka categorically and unreservedly rejects this draft resolution.
Consent of the country concerned is imperative for tangible results to promote and protect human rights. Pakistan played a key role in the 2009 resolution on Sri Lanka with the consent and cooperation of that country. This resolution achieved positive results. Sri Lanka fully cooperated with the human rights machinery. Interference in the internal affairs of Sri Lanka is unacceptable. No self-respecting country would agree to the intrusive measures advocated in this resolution. In particular, operative paragraph 10 of the resolution is inconsistent with the principles and purposes of the UN Charter, which calls for respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states. Mandated activities need to be carried out through the regular budget. Specificity of mandated activity or activities are therefore prerequisite with regard to the budget. Again, something that we have just heard from the Secretariat, and my delegation would like to know from where these funds will come. Because if these funds are to come from countries that have sponsored this resolution, it will obviously be seen as a process that will be tainted. This resolution is also a crass example of hypocrisy and double standards. It selectively targets the government of Sri Lanka but fails to hold to account the LTTE terrorists who indulged in mass murder of innocent people for 30 years. This Council must therefore reject such duplicity. For these reasons, Mr. President, and as a first step, Pakistan calls for a vote for the deletion of operative paragraph 10 of this resolution.
Meanwhile, putting forward a point of order during the debate today, Pakistan pointed out that a sum of $1.4 million had been estimated as the expense that the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights would have to bear to continue monitoring the human rights situation and to undertake a comprehensive investigation into allegations of human rights violations. The Pakistani representative moved a no-action motion on the resolution seeking the postponement of the debate. It was also proposed that the resolution be amended through the striking of Operative Clause 10, which calls for an international investigation into alleged human rights violations in Sri Lanka. Both motions were defeated through a vote. The vote on the resolution was then taken up with 23 nations voting for, 12 voting against and 12 abstentions. Notably, India, which supported the UNHRC resolutions on Sri Lanka in 2012 and 2013, abstained from voting.
Toutes les délégations ont-elles enregistré leur vote? Je demande aux délégations de vérifier.
Could I ask delegations to check if their voting intention has been correctly reflected on the screen? If that is the case, then I would ask the Secretariat to close the registration procedure.
Alors, les résultats du vote enregistrés sont comme suit.
The result of the vote is as follows.
23 pour,
23 votes in favour, 12 votes against, 12 abstentions.
dès lors le projet de résolution L1, Rev
The
1
draft resolution L1, Rev 1 is thereby adopted.
Sri Lanka should be provided all assistance it deserves in a cooperative and collaborative manner. Mr. President, it has been India's firm belief that adopting an intrusive approach that undermines national sovereignty and institutions is counterproductive. Any significant departure from the core principles of constructive international dialogue and cooperation has the potential to undermine efforts of this Council for promoting universal respect for the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Moreover, any external investigative mechanism with an open-ended mandate to monitor national processes for protection of human rights in a country is not reflective of the constructive approach of dialogue and cooperation. We are therefore concerned that the resolution has the potential to hinder the efforts of the country rather than contribute constructively to its efforts and hence inadvertently complicate the situation. Mr. President, it is for these reasons that my delegation cannot go along with the resolution and will abstain in the vote on it. Thank you.